When you think of Disney movies, the first things that probably come to mind are magical castles, fairy godmothers, and talking animals that sing catchy songs. But here's the twist. Many Disney stories weren't pulled out of thin air. They're actually rooted in real history, ancient myths, and sometimes even true people who lived and breathed long before animation brought them to life. That's right, behind the sparkle and the fantasy, you'll often find surprising truths. Some of Disney's most beloved classics were inspired by centuries-old legends, documented historical events, or even real-world locations you can still visit today. Now, don't get me wrong, Disney is known for sprinkling a very generous dose of creative pixie dust on these stories. A lot of details get changed, softened, or romanticized. After all, it wouldn't be much of a family-friendly movie if it stuck too closely to the grittier side of history. But underneath the animation, the songs, and the sidekicks, the real roots are still there. So today, we're counting down the top 10 Disney movies based on real-life events. From ancient warriors and mysterious lost cities to actual historical figures who shaped the world, you'll be surprised at just how much truth hides inside these fairy tales. And let's make a deal right now. As we go through this list, I want you to think about which one shocked you the most. Drop it in the comments when you're done watching, because some of these might completely change the way you look at Disney classics. Alright, let's kick things off with a story that blends archaeology, mythology, and a touch of science fiction. Number 10, Atlantis, The Lost Empire, 2001. Before we had princesses with magical hair or ice powers, Disney took us on an underwater adventure, not to visit Ariel in The Little Mermaid, but to chase down one of the oldest and most enduring legends of all time, Atlantis. In Atlantis, The Lost Empire, we follow Milo Thatch, a nerdy linguist who joins an expedition to find the mythical lost city beneath the sea. Disney gave us flying machines, glowing crystals, and a civilization that looked like it came straight out of a steampunk comic book. But here, Cess, where it gets interesting, the legend of Atlantis did not start in Hollywood. It actually goes all the way back to ancient Greece. The first written account of Atlantis came from the philosopher Plato over 2,300 years ago. In two of his dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, Plato described a mighty island nation that was rich, technologically advanced, and powerful. Until it grew corrupt, the gods punished Atlantis by sinking it into the ocean in a single day and night of misfortune. Ever since then, Atlantis has become one of history's greatest mysteries. Was Plato talking about a real place, or was it just a cautionary story about pride and downfall? Historians have debated it for centuries. Some believe Atlantis might have been inspired by the island of Santorini, which was devastated by a volcanic eruption. Others think it was purely symbolic, but the fascination stuck. Explorers, treasure hunters, and storytellers have been chasing Atlantis for millennia. Disney tapped directly into that fascination. They even borrowed ideas from early 20th century adventure tales, especially the works of Jules Verne. If you've seen 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, you'll notice the similarities. Submarines, daring explorers, and lost worlds. The movie also paid close attention to real-world culture. The creators worked with linguist Mark Okrand, the same man who invented the Klingon language for Star Trek, to design Atlantean, a full, functional language for the film. That's dedication for a movie that most people just remember for its glowing blue crystals. While no one has ever found proof of Atlantis, Disney's version captured the spirit of humanity's endless curiosity. It wasn't just about a city under the sea, it was about our desire to uncover lost knowledge and reconnect with ancient wisdom. So, while Atlantis, The Lost Empire might be science fiction on the surface, it's built on one of the most persistent legends in human history. And that makes it way more real than most people realize. Number 9, The Jungle Book, 1967 and 2016. Next up, let's swing into the jungle. The Jungle Book is one of Disney's most beloved stories, with its catchy songs like The Bare Necessities and its colorful characters, Baloo the bear, Bagheera the panther, and of course, Shere Khan the tiger. But underneath the fun is a story that is much closer to real life than you might think. The movie was based on Rudyard Kipling's stories, first published in the 1890s. Kipling grew up in colonial India, and his writings were heavily influenced by the wildlife, landscapes, and cultures he experienced there. While Mowgli, the boy raised by wolves, is fictional, Kipling wasn't entirely inventing the concept of a wild child. Believe it or not, India has documented cases of feral children, real kids who grew up outside human society, sometimes even living among animals. One famous case was reported in the 1800s when two girls were found living with wolves in Bengal. They walked on all fours, growled, and struggled to adapt to human life after being rescued. These accounts were often exaggerated by colonial officials, but they captured the public imagination and likely influenced Kipling's vision of Mowgli. Disney, of course, lightened things up. Instead of showing the harsh reality of survival in the wild, we got a playful bear teaching Mowgli to relax and sing. But the backdrop, the dense jungles of India and the real animals that live there, kept the story grounded in reality. The 2016 live-action remake took this even further, using cutting-edge CGI to recreate the Indian jungle in stunning detail. While it was filmed on sound stages, the animals' behaviors were carefully modeled after real species. Shere Khan, for example, reflects the true power of Bengal tigers, which are apex predators in the region. And here's another fun fact. Kipling himself may have been inspired by ancient Indian folklore, where children raised by wolves appear in myths long before his stories. This theme pops up in cultures around the world, from Rome as tale of Romulus and Remus to Native American legends. So, while we don't have any record of a boy named Mowgli living with wolves, the foundation of the Jungle Book is rooted in both folklore and real human history. It's less of a fairy tale and more of a mirror reflecting humanity. Fascination with the thin line between civilization and the wild. Number 8, Hercules 1997. If there's one Disney movie that proves the line between myth and history can blur, it's Hercules. On the surface, it looks like your classic animated comedy. Catchy, gospel-inspired songs, colorful sidekicks, and a villain with flaming blue hair. But beneath all that Disney flair lies one of the most enduring legends from ancient Greece. The character of Hercules is based on Heracles, a hero from Greek mythology whose stories date back thousands of years. Heracles wasn't just a random strongman, he was considered the son of Zeus, king of the gods and a mortal woman. His life was defined by hardship and strength, with his most famous tale being the 12 labors of Heracles, impossible tasks he had to complete as punishment for past actions. Now, yes, where it gets interesting, many of those labors were tied to real myths and local legends across Greece. The slaying of the Nemean lion, for example, may have been inspired by real encounters with big cats in the ancient world. Cleaning the Ogden stables? That could have been a symbolic way of describing massive engineering feats, like diverting rivers to wash out farmland. In other words, while the stories were exaggerated, they often reflected real struggles and achievements of early societies. Disney's version took a very different approach. Instead of showing Hercules as a tragic, flawed hero, they reimagined him as a sweet, clumsy underdog trying to go the distance and prove himself worthy. They also gave Hades a major role, turning him into the main villain, even though in Greek mythology he wasn't considered evil. He was just the god of the underworld, doing his job. But that as part of Disney, it's magic. They simplified the complex myths into a family-friendly narrative while keeping the essence of Hercules as a symbol of strength and perseverance. Beyond the movie itself, the story of Hercules shows how myths can serve as windows into real history. Ancient myths weren't just bedtime stories. They were a way for people to explain the world around them, celebrate cultural values, and record memorable events. The Greeks used stories of Heracles to embody ideals of courage, resilience, and the struggle between human weakness and divine expectation. Even today, Hercules remains a cultural icon. From statues in ancient temples to modern comic books and movies, he's one of those figures who transcends time. And Disney's 1997 film, even though it played fast and loose with the original myths, introduced an entire generation to the hero's name and legacy. So, while Hercules might not have had a wisecracking satyr sidekick or starred in a musical number, the heart of the story is very real. It is rooted in the mythology of a civilization that has shaped Western thought for thousands of years. Number 7, Treasure Planet 2002. Now, let's sail, or rather blast off, into another Disney adventure that's surprisingly grounded in real history. Treasure Planet might look like pure sci-fi with its space galleons and alien pirates, but at its core, it is a retelling of one of the most famous adventure novels of all time, Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island, first published in 1883. The original story followed young Jim Hawkins as he embarked on a dangerous sea voyage to uncover buried treasure, encountering the cunning and unforgettable pirate Long John Silver. Disney's version kept the same heart of the story, but swapped the oceans for galaxies, turning ships into spacefaring vessels and parrots into cybernetic sidekicks. But here's the kicker. Stevenson's Treasure Island wasn't just fantasy. It was deeply inspired by real pirate history. Many of the details we now associate with pirate legends, treasure maps marked with an X, peg legs, talking parrots, and even the idea of burying treasure, all gained popularity thanks to Stevenson's novel. And Stevenson himself didn't pull these ideas from nowhere. He was drawing on centuries of real piracy during the so-called Golden Age of piracy, roughly 1650 to 1730. Pirates like Blackbeard, Bartholomew Roberts, and William Kidd roamed the seas, striking fear into merchant ships and coastal towns. Their reputations became larger than life, with tales spreading across Europe and the Americas. Take Long John Silver, for example. While he wasn't a direct copy of any single pirate, many believe Stevenson modeled him on Captain William Henley, a one-legged seafarer Stevenson actually knew. Silver's mix of charm, cunning, and menace reflects what real pirates had to be, both brutal fighters and charismatic leaders. Disney's decision to reimagine Treasure Island as a space epic with Treasure Planet was bold, and while the movie didn't perform well at the box office, it's become a cult favorite for its stunning visuals and emotional storytelling. The father-son dynamic between Jim and Silver still hits hard, no matter if it's set on the high seas or in a galaxy far away. What's fascinating is that Treasure Planet serves as a reminder of how adaptable true stories are. Pirate legends may have started in Caribbean waters, but their spirit could be transplanted to outer space and still feel authentic. The themes of adventure, greed, betrayal, and courage are timeless. And beyond that, it keeps alive a connection to real history. Every time a new version of Treasure Island appears, whether in books, films, or Disney's spacefaring adaptation, it continues to shine a spotlight on an era of history that was as thrilling as it was dangerous. So the next time you watch Treasure Planet and see Jim Hawkins surfing solar winds, remember, behind all the sci-fi spectacle lies a story born from real 18th century pirates, treasure hunters, and the dangerous seas they once ruled. Number 6. The Lion King, 1994. When The Lion King first roared onto screens in 1994, it instantly became one of Disney's crown jewels. With unforgettable songs, breathtaking animation, and one of the most emotional openings in movie history, it feels like pure fantasy. Lions talking, hyenas cracking jokes, and baboons holding up newborn cubs for dramatic effect. But here's the surprising part. The Lion King is actually grounded in a mix of real-world history, ecology, and storytelling traditions. Let's start with the setting. The film's animators took research trips to Kenya's Hell's Gate National Park, a region known for its dramatic cliffs, sweeping savannas, and diverse wildlife. If you've ever looked at Pride Rock and thought, that looks like a real place, well, that's because it basically is. The landscapes were directly inspired by the African wilderness, and the animal behaviors, while stylized, reflect real ecology. Now, the story itself borrows from multiple sources. The most famous comparison is Shakespeare's Hamlet. Simba, the rightful heir to the throne, loses his father in a betrayal orchestrated by his uncle, Scar. He flees, grows up in exile, and eventually returns to claim his place. That's Shakespeare through and through. But Disney layered this with African influences, including storytelling traditions, where animals embody human traits and lessons. And there helps an even deeper link. Some scholars point to parallels with the Epic of Sundiata, a 13th century West African tale about a young prince who overcomes exile and returns to become the founder of the Mali Empire. Much like Simba, Sundiata's story is about loss, resilience, and reclaiming destiny. While Disney has never confirmed this connection, the similarities are striking. On the ecological side, the film cleverly reflects real predator-prey dynamics and the delicate balance of ecosystems. Remember Mufasa's famous Circle of Life speech? That's not just a catchy song. It's a reflection of how interconnected the African savanna truly is. Lions may be kings, but they rely on the survival of prey species, plants, and even scavengers like hyenas to maintain balance. In other words, it's not just philosophy, it's actual biology. Of course, Disney took creative liberties. Hyenas aren't evil masterminds in real life. They were highly intelligent pack hunters and one of the most successful predators in Africa. But the choice to portray them as outcasts highlights the tension between balance and chaos, which is central to the story. So yes, while The Lion King is a fictional story filled with music and talking animals, its bones are built from real-world influences. Shakespearean drama, African folklore, West African epic traditions, and the very real landscapes and ecosystems of East Africa. It is a powerful reminder that even the most fantastical stories can grow from the roots of history and nature. Number 5. The Hunchback of Notre Dame, 1996. Now, we move from the open savannas of Africa to the stone towers of medieval Paris. The Hunchback of Notre Dame is often remembered as one of Disney's darkest animated films, a story filled with religious imagery, social injustice, and themes of cruelty versus compassion. While it's adapted from Victor Hugo's 1831 novel, parts of this story actually connect to real history and real people. Victor Hugo's novel itself was written with a purpose. At the time, the Notre Dame Cathedral was in disrepair, neglected after the French Revolution. Hugo wanted to draw attention to the Gothic masterpiece and inspire restoration. His story of Quasimodo, the deformed bell ringer, and Esmeralda, the free-spirited dancer, was a way of breathing life back into the cathedral's walls. But here's where it gets fascinating. There really was a hunchback working at Notre Dame in the 19th century. Records show that during the same time Hugo was writing his novel, a stonemason named Trajan worked on the cathedral. He was described as having a hunched back, and some historians believe he directly inspired Hugo's creation of Quasimodo. And that's not the only historical tie. The novel, and later Disney's adaptation, explored the clash between different social classes and prejudices of the era. The treatment of the Romani people, portrayed through Esmeralda's struggles, reflects real discrimination in medieval and early modern Europe. They were often scapegoated, marginalized, and portrayed as outsiders, themes that Hugo wove deeply into his book. Disney's adaptation softened much of the darker content, but it didn't shy away from heavy themes. Judge Claude Frollo, for instance, is one of Disney's most chilling villains. In the novel, Frollo was an archdeacon. Disney changed him into a judge to avoid religious controversy, but kept his obsession, cruelty, and hypocrisy intact. His struggles with power and desire reflect real historical tensions between morality, law, and personal corruption. Even the cathedral itself plays a central role in both the novel and the film. Notre Dame isn't just a backdrop, it's a character. Every gargoyle, stained glass window, and bell tells a story of medieval craftsmanship and spiritual symbolism. And thanks in part to Hugo's novel, and later adaptations like Disney's, Notre Dame was eventually restored, securing its place as one of the most iconic landmarks in France. When you watch The Hunchback of Notre Dame, you're not just seeing a fictional tale about love, kindness, and acceptance. You're glimpsing echoes of real history, a real cathedral, a real hunchback who may have inspired Quasimodo, and very real struggles of marginalized groups in European society. It is proof that sometimes the most powerful Disney stories aren't escapes from reality, they're reflections of it. Number 4, Moana 2016. When Disney's Moana came out in 2016, it wasn't just another princess story. It was a love letter to the ocean, to Polynesian culture, and to the incredible history of the Pacific Islands. What made this film stand out wasn't just its music or animation, but the fact that it was deeply inspired by real people, real traditions, and real history. The story follows Moana, a young Polynesian girl chosen by the ocean to restore balance after the demigod Maui steals the heart of Te Fiti. While Disney added plenty of fantasy, like a giant lava monster and a shape-shifting trickster, the foundation of the story is rooted in the true history of Polynesian navigation and exploration. For thousands of years, Polynesians were among the world's greatest sailors. Long before compasses, GPS, or modern ships, they voyaged across the vast Pacific Ocean using only the stars, ocean currents, and the flight patterns of birds. These explorers settled islands across a region spanning thousands of miles, from Hawaii to New Zealand to Easter Island. Here, as the fascinating part, historians call a period between 2,000 and 500 years ago the Long Pause. For reasons that are still debated, Polynesians stopped voyaging for centuries. Then suddenly, they resumed, reaching some of the most remote islands on Earth. Disney used this mystery as inspiration for Moana's story. Why did her people stop voyaging, and what inspired them to start again? The character of Maui is also drawn from real Polynesian mythology. In legends across Hawaii, Samoa, and New Zealand, Maui is a cultural hero and trickster. He is said to have pulled islands up from the ocean with his magical fishhook, and even slowed down the sun to give people more daylight. Disney kept these myths but added humor and personality through Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson-esque performance. What makes Moana stand out even more is the care Disney took to honor Polynesian heritage. They worked with a cultural advisory group called the Oceanic Story Trust, made up of historians, navigators, and anthropologists from across the Pacific. This collaboration influenced everything from the design of Moana's canoe to the tattoos on Maui's body, which reflect real Polynesian traditions. Of course, Disney still added fantasy elements, but at its heart, Moana is about reconnecting with cultural roots, bravery, and the human drive to explore. It celebrates a history that was almost erased by colonization and reminds audiences that Polynesian navigators were some of the most advanced sailors the world has ever seen. So while Moana herself is fictional, her story is very real. It hears the story of a people who crossed the largest ocean on Earth, guided only by their knowledge, courage, and an unshakable bond with the sea. Number 3, Mulan, 1998. If you've ever watched Mulan, you know it is one of Disney's most empowering stories about a young woman who disguises herself as a man to take her father's place in the Chinese army. But unlike many Disney heroines, Mulan wasn't born from fairy tales or Western literature. Her roots go back over 1,000 years to one of China's most famous legends, the story of Hua Mulan. The earliest version of her tale appears in a poem called The Ballad of Mulan, believed to have been written sometime between the 5th and 6th centuries. The ballad tells the story of a girl who, out of love and duty for her family, takes her aging father's place in battle. For 12 years, she fights with skill and bravery, earning the respect of her comrades who never realize she's a woman. When the war ends, she refuses riches and power, choosing instead to return home to her family life. Now, historians debate whether Hua Mulan was a real person or purely a legend. Some argue she could have been based on several real women who served in the military at different points in Chinese history. Records do exist of women warriors in ancient China, especially during the northern and southern dynasties. But even if Mulan herself wasn't one individual, the story has endured for centuries because it embodies values deeply rooted in Chinese culture: loyalty, honor, sacrifice, and devotion to family. Disney's 1998 film took these core ideas and reimagined them for a global audience. While the movie kept the basics, Mulan disguising herself, joining the army, and saving her country, it added comic sidekicks, catchy songs, and a climactic battle with Shan Yu on the roof of the Emperor's palace. Needless to say, the talking dragon Mushu wasn't part of the original ballad, but Disney did more than just add humor. It emphasized themes of identity and courage, showing Mulan as someone who doesn't fit the traditional mold but finds strength by embracing her true self. This resonates universally, even beyond the historical context. The story's impact has lasted well beyond the animated film. In 2020, Disney released a live-action remake that leaned closer to the legend, stripping away the musical elements and focusing more on Mulan as a warrior. While the reception was mixed, it highlighted just how powerful and enduring this story is. Whether Mulan was real or legendary, her tale carries undeniable truth. It reflects the struggles of countless women throughout history who defied expectations, took on roles they weren't supposed to have, and proved themselves equal to anyone on the battlefield. So, when you watch Mulan, you are not just watching a Disney heroine, you reconnecting with a story that has been told, retold, and celebrated in China for over 1,000 years. A story that continues to inspire anyone who's ever had to hide their true potential, only to unleash it when the world least expects it. Number 2, Pocahontas, 1995. When most people think of Disney's Pocahontas, they picture sweeping rivers, songs about painting with the colors of the wind, and a forbidden romance between a Native American woman and an English explorer. But behind the animation and the music is the story of a very real person, one whose life was far more complicated and far more tragic than what Disney showed us. Pocahontas was born around 1596. The daughter of Wahun Senekau, the paramount chief of the Powhatan Confederacy in what is now Virginia. Her real name was Amonute, though she was often called Matawaka. Pocahontas was actually a nickname, meaning playful one. In 1607, English colonists arrived in Jamestown, the first permanent English settlement in North America. This is where the legend of Pocahontas and John Smith begins. Disney portrays them as star-crossed lovers, But historically, Pocahontas was around 10 or 11 years old when she met Smith, who was in his late 20s. While Smith did write about Pocahontas saving his life, many historians believe he exaggerated or even fabricated the event to make himself look more heroic. What we do know is that Pocahontas played an important role in easing tensions between the Powhatan people and the English settlers, often bringing food and helping to maintain fragile peace. But her story took a darker turn as conflicts escalated. In 1613, she was captured by the English during a period of hostilities. During her captivity, she converted to Christianity, took the name Rebecca, and eventually married John Rolfe, an English tobacco farmer. This marriage is often remembered as a peace match that brought a temporary truce between the English and Powhatan people. But it also marked the beginning of a much larger story, the growing colonization of native lands, which would have devastating consequences for generations. Pocahontas traveled to England in 1616, where she was presented to English society as a symbol of the civilized savage, a propaganda tool to show that Native Americans could adopt European ways. Tragically, she died the following year at only 21 years old, never returning to her homeland. Disney's version softened these realities, turning the story into a romance and focusing on environmental and cultural themes. While the film deserves credit for introducing global audiences to Native American history and including strong messages about respect for nature, it glossed over the harsher truths of colonization and Pocahontas' short, difficult life. Still, Pocahontas remains one of the most famous figures in American history. Her real story, both the myths and the truths, continues to spark debate, reflection, and reinterpretation. And whether you view Disney's film as a stepping stone to learning the real history or as a romanticized fantasy, it undeniably connects to one of the most pivotal moments in the early story of America. Number 1, Saving Mr. Banks, 2013. Most Disney films are inspired by myths, legends, or faraway lands, but the number 1 spot on our list is unique because it is not about a legend at all. It is about Disney history itself. Saving Mr. Banks tells the behind-the-scenes story of how Walt Disney convinced author P.L. Travers to allow him to adapt her beloved book Mary Poppins into a film. The story begins with Travers, the British author of Mary Poppins, who was fiercely protective of her creation. She saw Mary Poppins not just as a magical nanny, but as a deeply personal character, shaped by her own childhood experiences. Walt Disney, meanwhile, had promised his daughters that he would bring Mary Poppins to the big screen, but he spent more than 20 years trying to win Travers over. The film dramatizes this tug-of-war, showing how Disney courted Travers, how she resisted his charm, and how she reluctantly agreed, but not without strict conditions. Emma Thompson brings Travers to life as stubborn, witty, and deeply emotional, while Tom Hanks steps into the shoes of Walt Disney himself, capturing both his charisma and his determination. What makes Saving Mr. Banks fascinating is that it reveals the personal struggles behind the creation of a Disney classic. For Travers, Mary Poppins was tied to her memories of her father, whose warmth and flaws inspired the character of Mr. Banks in her books. The movie portrays how difficult it was for her to let someone else shape that story, especially in a way that added music, animation, and Disney-style optimism. And yet, despite her resistance, Disney's version of Mary Poppins became one of the most beloved films in cinematic history. The 1964 movie won 5 Academy Awards and continues to enchant audiences to this day. But Saving Mr. Banks reminds us that behind every magical story, there are real people, real negotiations, and sometimes even real heartache. Unlike the other entries on this list, which are drawn from myths and legends, Saving Mr. Banks is rooted entirely in fact. It's Disney telling a story about itself, about creativity, compromise, and the often complicated relationship between art and commerce. That's why it takes the number 1 spot. Because in the end, Disney's most magical story might be the story of how its own magic is made. And there you have it. The top 10 Disney movies based on real-life events. From mythical heroes and lost civilizations to real explorers, historical figures, and even Walt Disney himself, these films show us something important, that behind every fantasy, there's a grain of truth. Think about it. Moana reminds us of the real navigators who crossed oceans with nothing but the stars. Mulan echoes the courage of women who defied expectations. The Hunchback of Notre Dame preserves the memory of a real cathedral and perhaps a real bell ringer. And Pocahontas forces us to reflect on the complexities of history, even when the truth is far less romantic than the animated version. Disney may add magic, music, and talking animals, but the reason these stories resonate is because they're built on human experiences: bravery, love, tragedy, discovery, and hope. That's why, even decades later, they continue to inspire audiences around the world. So, now it's your turn. Which of these films surprised you the most? Were you shocked to learn that The Jungle Book was inspired by real cases of feral children? Or that Atlantis comes straight from ancient Greek philosophy? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your take. And if you enjoyed this countdown, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss another deep dive into the fascinating world where history meets storytelling. Because at the end of the day, Disney reminds us of something powerful. Reality and imagination aren't opposites. They're partners. And when they come together, that's when the magic truly happens.